So one of the things I wanted to touch on, Dave, was the isolation of my alcoholism, the isolation of my disease, which incidentally took me a period of time sober to actually, well, not only accept that it was a disease, but understand what alcoholism really is. And not the clinical part of alcoholism, the diagnoses, but the underlying causes. And one of the things I wanted to focus on is isolation and the loneliness that comes from isolation. So ever since I was a little kid, long before I picked up a drink, as far back as I can remember, maybe as early as 7 or 8 years old, playing with the girls across the street and not building relationships in the schoolyard. Something felt different inside of me. Something felt separate. That's the best way I can describe it. A separation from other peers. I didn't feel that separation in my home life with my parents. I didn't necessarily feel it with my older siblings, but they weren't my peers, right? Everyone was older. When it came to trying to build relationships at a very young age, even in grade school with peers, something felt different in me, which I later came to understand after getting into the program, after experiencing the pain of isolation, that I realized that the drinking was just to rid myself of that separation, rid myself of that hole in the donut I might have mentioned before, which is part of a 6-step inventory when we do the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's recognizing defects of character and sitting in I think I said before, the uncomfortableness of being uncomfortable. The isolation came long before the drinking. So, and I hear this in other stories all the time. So what it was actually like to pick up a drink was that once I realized I found what I thought was the elixir, altered my personality. Again, slowly, not to the extreme overnight. Some people tell stories that it does happen like a light switch. All of a sudden they're acting one way and then boom. But it didn't take too long, probably a couple of months before I realized, oh, wow, I'm talking more and I'm not feeling nervous. I'm not feeling uncomfortable around people. That's the best way to describe it. I'm not feeling anxious or uncomfortable.
Right.
And I didn't have to be drunk to feel that way. And that is where I think the on-off switch with my drinking failed because I mean, sometimes I hear people, having 2 to 3 drinks, feeling very comfortable, and they say, okay, I'm going to stop because I like what I'm feeling right now. Like, this feels good. I don't need any more. This feels good. I'm lighthearted, I'm laughing, and boom, boom, boom. Having that transformation for people who don't have addictive patterns is natural, right? But where for me, and many other alcoholics in the stories I've heard, where it gets out of hand is not knowing when to stop. See, I would continue to drink thinking that if I'm funny now, in another hour, I'll be even funnier. All those things like when you're young and you're dating. If I'm flirty now, just wait. But that wouldn't happen. What would come was a lot more sloppiness. That's what would happen. Slurring of words, all the natural things. I don't have to tell you what it's like to be drunk, but the behavior would then get, it's almost as if I remember times where I'd almost go in reverse feeling wise. I would start to feel the anxiety again while being drunk. I would start to feel the dis-ease, the unease of being around people. But because I was intoxicated,
Yeah.
the mouth didn't stop. And I would get edgy, and then I would get, sometimes downright mean because the feelings were rising up in me again. Those uncomfortable, irritable, I'm different than you kind of feelings. I would still be very mentally, for the most part, mentally aware until I wasn't aware because of the intoxication, but mentally aware of my surroundings in the sense that I was so self-centered, so focused on, okay, in this moment, what are you thinking of me? In this moment, I'm not thinking about your feelings or what's going on with you or whether or not you're having a good time or not. But I'm concerned about my good time, right? I'm concerned about what are you thinking of me now? I'm a bit of a show off here, and what do you think?
Yeah, yeah. So go back. The isolation piece
Yeah.
is it's so interesting because it sounds to me like it was a you were isolated in a crowd. It
Yes.
wasn't isolation where you had to. I mean, you probably needed to separate yourself at some level as a younger person, but given that life involves other people, you probably felt like I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you're with your girlfriends, you're at school, you're hanging out with other kids, feeling totally disconnected and isolated from them, or not wanting to admit something about yourself, whatever that was, and then holding it down for quite frankly years, not wanting to be seen in some way because you don't want to be ridiculed or teased or whatever the heck was going on, right? Then when alcohol becomes basically a tool for you, when you realize that, oh, I don't have those feelings, I would think that the years of suppressing the insecurity or whatever you want to call it was just waiting to come out and fight, and you didn't know it, right? So the alcohol became the gateway for all of that unspoken tension that was sitting inside of you, is how I'm hearing this. Is that accurate?
I'm smiling because you're describing it as exactly as that. And it wasn't physical isolation, right? It wasn't separation that I was drinking alone yet, right? Not yet, but the yet came.
Yeah.
It's the emotional and do I dare say spiritual isolation. The feeling of not belonging would bubble up again. That feeling that I was trying to suppress. And like you said, years and years and years of suppressing that, not talking about it, not finding a space
Yeah.
or the words or the intellect or the language, whatever in my young mind couldn't. I think it was fear too. Like I grew up in a household that was very, very loving, but we didn't talk about feelings per se. We didn't talk about how do you get from point A to point D by working through a situation with communication, by
Yeah.
working through conflict with a communication. There actually was no conflict in the household that I could see until I told you the story about my brother Greg. That
Sure.
was a visible thing that where conflict erupted from that. Um, Unease erupted from that. So that's my earliest memory too of witnessing a disruption
Mm.
in my household of something that looked really, really bad,
Mm.
really, really painful, and was being talked about. So here I am, growing up until I'm about the age of 14, 15, where conflicts just aren't talked about.
Mm.
Or they are being talked about, but because I'm the baby of the family, I'm not hearing how they're resolved.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
It could have been a little bit of like, let's protect the young one, the young one doesn't, that was very common back then.
Yeah.
Parents kind of, okay, it's almost like they looked at someone a certain age, okay, they're old enough to hear this now, if you're not, leave the room. So it would bubble up again. And then, so then it was almost like no matter how much I drank, at some stage I would hit because I feel those suppressed feelings came up, and no amount of alcohol or I didn't do a lot of drugs, but no amount of um, anything I could put in my body was going to suppress them anymore.
I got to ask you a question, and you
Sure.
probably can't diagnose this, but as you're talking, it's just making me think about how alcohol played a role in my life. And thank God I don't have an addiction. There's a ton of alcoholism on one side of my family. I've spoken about this in the past. There's a load of it, and it was just kind of a cultural norm, to just see, on one side of my family, just drinking was a very, very normal thing. Having alcoholic relatives was a normal thing. Several of them, most of them, died very young of different unfortunate circumstances. A couple of them had to have limbs amputated because of the damage they did to their bodies. And my parents shielded us from that. So anytime we were in an environment where certain relatives would come, we would always leave. And so even though it's where we came from, we hid from it, hidden from it. And so then I got this mindset, and I look back and I think I hate the fact that I was like this, but I got to the point as a younger person, 12, 13, 14, where I would resent anybody who drank. So and that was a killer for me in school because, in middle school, kids started drinking. And then in high school, it was very normal. And I looked at it and said, and I had this warped perception that it was completely like off limits. And it's not because I didn't know about it. It's because I only knew of the bad stuff, and I viewed it as a very, very bad thing. And so I isolated myself. I pulled back from anybody and everybody. And I started judging the world the opposite, as the world is weak. Nobody says no to this stuff. I say no to this stuff, but the more I said no to it, and the more I avoid, it wasn't even a fear of it. It was more of I looked down on it. And as a result of that, though, I spent a ton of time alone because I didn't know how to integrate and socialize, because like we never talked about it. We just ran from it. We were pulled away from it. And I think it was later in I was probably 18 or 19 before I really even was willing to try something. And then the same thing happened. I'm like, wow, this stuff is pretty good. And and all of a sudden I was liking something that I had hated, for a long time. And a part of my personality came out where I was like, I had fun. I had fun and I loved it. And my wife and I talk about it to this day. I'm like, I had such a good time that I have no regrets about it. Now, I did go overboard. I did some things I shouldn't have done. I was very careless. I'm not proud of any of those things. I took chances that I shouldn't have taken. And I got sick a lot. But it, but and the reason I think about it, I'm like, wow, I did some stupid things because I never was able to digest the fact that there is a socially acceptable way to handle it. And I never learned that socially acceptable way. So this is not about me, obviously, but as you're talking, I feel like I had a different path, and I wonder if you could make sense of that at all, or is that just not worth commenting on?
Everything you say is worth commenting on, Dave. You invited me to have a conversation, so this is about us. It's not just about me either. So yeah, I want to say one thing. I want to try it back to my own mother for a minute. When you described that you actually started to resent people who drank, my mother resented people who drank, and that's because she was raised by an alcoholic father. She had an alcoholic father-in-law, my father's father. And I didn't know about this resentment until one day at my brother Greg's wedding. My aunt, her older sister by 10 years, I love and adored. My time with them so interesting and fun. They would get together and they would finish each other's sentences and tell stories. And I could sit in a room as a young boy and just listen to their conversations, not contribute, and laugh my ass off. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
After that wedding, my aunt, for the very first time that I saw, was lit. And I remember my mother was pissed.
Yep.
She didn't say anything. It was her actions with her. And she literally was like, almost like Ella shaking her finger. And it was the only time I ever witnessed a conflict between those two sisters. And it took years for me to really understand that it probably reminded her of their father, right? And the fear that she must have been carried that anybody who drinks may eventually become outraged or violent, even or harmful, right? So anyway, based on what you said, I just wanted to say like that your story reminded me of my own mother's resentment of people who drank.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, there was only a bad side of drinking. There was violence, there was anger, there was cheating, there was abuse. All those things were associated with drinking. So in my mind, you don't do it. But I had never done it. And again, same thing with my mother. She resented. Now, later in life, she was sneaking drinks herself. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're saying all this stuff and you're drinking in the dining room every night. But it was just almost embarrassed by the fact that she had said all those things and was hiding. And but I say, as an adult, I enjoy it. I've learned to enjoy it, and with having 3 kids, it sucks having 3 kids going through high school and college, and you see what kids do and how they abuse it and how reckless they are. But we've talked about it openly. Some have made more mistakes than others, but at the end of the day, I wish I had a better relationship or understanding of alcohol at a younger age, and I wish we did talk about it. And then maybe I would have handled it better in my 20s. That said, I can look back on my 20s and say, I had a blast. I just wish and I'm lucky to have come out of that without hurting anybody. And so,
Listen, I can say I had a blast too. I think maybe I talked about those first early years of meeting my college girlfriend in June during orientation. She found me the very first day of classes. She was vivacious, outgoing. She was a singer. She could get me into bars. She was just a lot of fun to be around, and her friends were a lot of fun. And there was a bit of normal drinking going on for a while. And by normal, I say me.
yeah,
Before I just crossed that line. So it's not to say like my drinking was always chaotic or horrible. It wasn't. It was a slow transformation. One of the things that you touched on too, I wanted to say that you remind. Oh, so you know what? In your story about your mother, you just painted my story with my brother Greg. I think I mentioned before that. I was really resentful of him when his drinking looked like it was causing chaos and upset and caused my dad to cry, right? And I really resented that. When I took stock in started to take stock in my own recovery, you got to remember, I had picked up a drink before Greg had passed at the height of his alcoholism, and I'm still pointing the finger, and I got three fingers pointing back. I'm
hmm
doing the same thing. Maybe I'm not divorced yet, right? Maybe I didn't go through war. Maybe I hadn't made my parents cry yet, but I could start to see like, oh, I'm heading down the same path here.
yeah,
And so it took me several years in recovery to work through that resentment and recognize that I was resenting him for having the same disease that I have.
yeah,
And now I don't resent that anymore. I recognize the fact that alcohol is alcohol is a subtle foe, and it's insidious and powerful in its disease, and it wants to isolate you. I had evidence of that, from my brother. I have evidence of that now, decades of evidence of that in my own experience,
yeah.
right? I have to stay on my toes. I have a daily reprieve from alcohol because the feelings I can still flip into isolation.
Mm.
I've been sober long enough to start recognizing where am I isolating and where am I just having quiet time, right?
Mm.
There is a huge, huge difference. Depending on my state of mind, depending on what's going on in the course of 24 hours, depending on my spiritual connection and
Mm.
my desire or non-desire to help others or put others first, depending on the level of my own self-awareness and um, I have to beware of self-indulgence, right?
Mm.
Depending on all those factors in a 24-hour period, I am still prone to isolation, what I consider alcoholic isolation, where I'm not picking up the phone and calling people in the program, where I'm saying snarky things to my husband, where I'm not answering the phone to people who are reaching out to me who may need help to stay away from a drink that day. All of that is really isolating behavior. I'm isolating myself because it takes me back to the little boy who really felt the safest in his own bedroom alone, listening to records
Mm.
on the record player. And that is where my drinking started. I think that's an important point to make. Sneaking booze in brown paper bags past my own mother's nose, downstairs, up into my room. That's where my drinking started. Didn't start in a bar. I was underage. It started in that same space that I once found safe and thought I would continue to find safe, and
Right.
did
Yep.
at that time. It was my own lubricant, social or otherwise. So literally, it's important to say that my drinking started in isolation. It
Mm.
grew into the social drinking that I experienced for several years, but it started in isolation, and guess what? It ended in isolation. I wasn't at parties anymore. I may be in bars. Those times there were 10 years before I met my husband. I was living alone in a condo in Quincy, and I was sober for half of that time, the end half of that time. And in the beginning, I was drinking because I lived by myself. I didn't have a roommate, and I was drinking in isolation. And thinking back and reflecting on it now in conversations with you, I remember now like my God, I'm doing the same thing I did at 16, 17 years old in my parents' home, in my own bedroom.
When did you know, or what would you say if you observe somebody right now doing that? Like if somebody drinks alone, is that an absolute
I would drag their ass to an AA meeting because
immediately, immediately?
kicking and screaming. I would, that would definitely be a sign. I would be very concerned. And I would be very concerned if someone's doing that at any age, Dave, at any age,
Yep.
16 or 65, I would be very concerned about that.
You commented the last time we spoke about getting into recovery. You knew something was up to at a level that you were willing to go somewhere to get help. But what was that? And you've gone back since because you have talked about relapses and things of that nature. But what is it about that experience that causes you to say something's wrong? I need to go and admit something to somebody about me. You know, what the booze, the drinking, the whatever. What causes you to get to that point that you're actually willing to expose yourself and share these things?
I hope this wouldn't be the case for anyone. I've heard enough stories to know that it hasn't been the case for everyone, but it has been the case for many people. It was not but 2 years since my brother Tom committed suicide that I found myself suicidal. Now, think about that. Think about having a large family of six. Two of those six siblings are gone. They passed in a very short period of time. And I'm feeling like I want to kill myself because of the feelings that I'm feeling. There has to be, and there is, and was, a spiritual, even mental disconnection between not right and wrong, but life and death. I mean, and I mean that in the sense that why? Why was a 23-year-old guy thinking that that was going to be another solution after my brother committed suicide 2 years ago, and I had already seen the devastation? So that's what brought me to my knees. That's what basically brought me to my knees. That's why I said, I know. That's why I said to the gentleman who brought me to my first AA meeting, I know something's wrong with me. I didn't want to say the words I'm suicidal, but remember, I did admit that to my brother's widow, and she begged me to get help. And she
Right.
said, this family cannot afford another tragedy, Donald.
Right.
Do whatever you need to support, but you need to get help. So I shared the feelings of suicidal ideation with a family member, and got the help.
So it's not like saying, I need help, I don't know how to use the screwdriver, or I need help, I don't understand this math problem. This is a much more personal, I need help. And I would think that once you acknowledge that, say outside of recovery, and then you go into a program or you sit with a group that you've never met before and you say these words, it's a much bigger deal saying those words. You can't take them back once they're out. So the expectation associated with commitment, I would think, from the outside world is now imposed on you, even unconsciously, right? I mean, now I know you went for help. Now I expect you to do something about it.
Yes, but I didn't. I was so sick at that point, Dave. I didn't care what. That's what really was the precipice. It wasn't so much me feeling suicidal. When you get to the point where you don't care if the whole world knows that you're hurting, you
Yeah,
get
good
help.
point.
You seek
Yeah.
help. I didn't care if my sister-in-law informed my parents, which she didn't do, and I'm glad in this hindsight she didn't, because just hearing those words would have been horrible for them. So she didn't share it with anyone, to my knowledge, and she kept that confidence.
Yeah.
Had I not gotten the help and done something about it, yeah, she probably would have shared it because she would have been too fearful for me. But at that point, I just didn't care if the whole world knew because I couldn't. It was physically evident that, and this is the thing I want to point to. My life became unmanageable.
Mm.
You know, I admitted I was powerless over alcohol because my life became unmanageable. Well, what does that mean, unmanageable? Here's a 23-year-old guy, not living on his own yet, under his parents' roof, um, working a full-time job that already I was failing at. I wasn't showing up in the best way that I could show up. I had no close friends to really speak of. No close friends. And girlfriend was gone. I was going to clubs. I wasn't making those connections. Remember, I had a revenge-minded plan.
Yeah.
Any guy that I was going to meet that was interested in me or dating me, that was not going to happen. I couldn't at that time build any peer relationships, friends or otherwise. So I basically got no friends. I got fly-by-night friends, bar flies. I'm a bar fly, and started a career that feels like it's dead end already. I'm 23 years old. Like that should have been the time of my life. I don't mean should have been in the critical sense. I don't criticize myself for anything that happened to me in the past or any of the. This disease is often looked at as a moral issue. It's not a moral issue. It took me years and several interruptions in my recovery, relapses, to fight the feeling that this is a moral issue. If I pick up a drink, I'm bad, not sick, but bad.
Yep.
I relate it to the time, 4 years ago, 6 years ago now, where I got cancer. And no one was waving their finger at me like, oh, you got cancer, you're a bad person, right? Right? A lot of sympathy, a lot of empathy, a lot of care, concern, all the natural human feelings that I responded to. Lots of support, lots of support. But go around telling people that I have alcoholism, I picked up a drink. Unless they are close family and friends and people in my circle of recovery, I'm likely setting myself up for a certain response, a certain look, almost a helplessness on the other person's part who hears that like, oh, I don't know what to do with you. Oh, maybe you should cut down. Like there's not a societal response that yet is helpful. Now, those responses are there in treatment centers, in AA meetings, in NA meetings, in support groups, yes, in families that are hopefully becoming to understand that it is not a moral issue. It is not choosing to be good or bad. It's choosing between being sick or better.
Right. So when we're born, none of us have an epiphany in the first few years of our lives, maybe even the first 10 years of our lives or more, to, hey, you know what, I'd really like a drink today. It's not like a 1-year-old or a 5-year-old is craving the idea of alcohol. They don't know what it is. It's not something that we're drawn to. It's something that's basically marketed to us in a lot of ways, introduced to us, but it's not something that just exists. It's something that was created. So is it really more about unresolved internal conflict? That just gets the chemical just becomes the Band-Aid for the unresolved internal conflict, the unspoken.
Great question. I don't want to slip into the diagnoses of alcoholism and what that is clinically, but I will say for me, my experience only, and if anyone hears this and relates to it, then this has been worth doing it. Yes, alcohol masked for a period of time the underlying causes, the fear, what I like to call free-floating anxiety. Free-floating anxiety, it can be defined as you're feeling anxious, but there's nothing to point to. It's not like, okay, I've got a business meeting, Dave, tomorrow for 3 hours, and I have to do this presentation. I'm feeling anxious. That's something in the future I can point to, and you can relate, and you can say, oh, I understand, Donn, I did that last week, but once I got through it, I was okay. Free-floating anxiety is I'm feeling anxious, and there's nothing around me that I can point to that I know what I'm feeling anxious about. So anxiety is about fear of something in the future, and depression is usually always something regrets from the past.
Right.
Both feelings have nothing to do with sitting in today.
Right.
Right now, in this moment, I'm not depressed and I'm not anxious because I'm talking with you one-on-one. Mm-hmm. I'm in the moment. I'm focusing on my words. I'm focusing on your question. I have nothing to feel anxious about. Okay. Because my mind isn't racing in all kinds of other directions that it can do, and so even when we end this conversation, right, and I'm moving around the house and I'm getting ready for my work day and I'm doing that, I'm going to have reflection. I'm going to think about things. If I start in one moment to start about, oh my gosh, I wish I didn't say that, or I wish I said this in a different way, I'm already moving toward a possible area of depression. Because what am I doing? I'm regretting something in the past. Okay.
Yeah.
Or if I'm thinking, oh my Lord, I've got to do this by 5 o'clock. I'm already in the future. Right. So I got to be very careful and mindful. And I think that's where some people get trapped, Dave, that they don't recognize what free floating anxiety is. And they think that there's just something wrong with them, that no one else could possibly be feeling this way. I want to say many, 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 many thousands and thousands of people feel that way.
Sure,
It
sure.
doesn't get talked about as much as I think it needs to. If I could set a course of action for young minds, and I'm talking about grade school, before they ever feel compelled or find what I found, that by picking up, even accidentally by picking up alcohol, that this was silencing some voice in them, some fears in them. I don't know. It's too bad that there aren't some programs in education right now that actually, I don't want to say psychological, but something that prepares young people and the parents who raise them to recognize patterns of behavior
Yeah.
that look like isolation, that look like trouble, or where their children may not be speaking, or becoming quiet, where they might have been once very involved. So anyway, that's getting off track, but
No, 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 no. It's not. I think it ties back to, I guess, directly or indirectly, potentially a fear of public judgment, which is, in my experience, probably the most crippling of all concerns that people have, more than death, more than whatever loss, even in some cases. It's people seem to be more limited by what they think others think of them. If they're to show who they are, or what they think, or how they feel, there's the potential that somebody else could criticize them or think badly of them, and as a result of that, they live life quietly, pretending not to be that way, or potentially uh, doubling down on being that way and imposing it on other people. I see a lot of that as well, where I'm going to come at you for thinking your thoughts, and I'm going to tell you that I don't care what you think of me, and I'm going to hurt you for it. When really you're still reacting to that fear or that discomfort with being judged by other people. So I kind of, that's what was running through my head as you were talking, is that, when people start to gravitate into isolation and reflect or become anxious or depressed, oftentimes, in my experience, it is tied to second guessing and doubting and regretting and wishing, and not just accepting that that's just the way it is right now. It doesn't mean it's that way forever.
so there are so many. Thank you, Dave. There's so many. I want to actually pose a question to you. What do you think is the reason for the not the reason, but what do you think is the reason behind the fear of those feelings, the fear of judgment?
Hmm.
What is it that society unfortunately has taught us to try to be, so we are not judged so harshly?
This is a good question. I don't have a straight answer for you. I would think that it ties back to the first time you or any of us felt a level of self-consciousness about anything. And this is so ridiculous, but I was 4 years old, and I was sitting on the couch in my living room, and my mother had a friend over who was overweight, significantly overweight. For some genius reason, decided to list anybody that I knew that was fat, not knowing that that was an insult. And I was sitting on my couch, and I started naming fat people. And then I said, Helena is fat, who was my mom's friend. And my mother came over and smashed me right in front of this. I didn't know what I did. I was so clueless, because the word fat wasn't derogatory to me as a 4-year-old. But in that moment, I cried. She hit me hard. It hurt. And I knew in that moment I had done something wrong, but I didn't comprehend what it was. So all of a sudden I became aware that I've got to be more conscious, I guess, of what I'm thinking or saying, without really understanding. There was no discussion. It was, you ignorant little son of a bitch. You don't say that about anybody. But I didn't know. So I think in that moment is when I started to become, I probably had a negative reaction to judgment, and I guess in some way that maybe that's my first memory of that. So again, I don't know if it actually ties back to what you're saying.
Well, so at 4 years old, you were given a very important and insightful lesson, right?
Yes.
By getting smacked by your mother.
Yeah.
You knew that whatever was coming out of in your mouth at that moment was the wrong thing to say.
Right.
The fact that that action changed the course of how you conducted yourself, that to me was a good lesson.
Yep.
You know, I mean,
Yep.
I experienced something very similar that we don't have to get into the story, but very, very similar lessons were delivered sometimes in abruptly harsh ways. But I remember them, just like you just said, the recall. So the point I was going to make about the judgment from society. It's this distorted notion that we must all strive for perfection, that we must look, act, conduct ourselves,
Yeah.
watch everything we say. It's this notion that, you know, the more perfect you look and sound, the less chances that you're going to draw any attention to yourself.
Yeah.
It's a really twisted norm. And no matter how much, and look at the advertising still. I mean, I know there's counter advertising now that you know talks about everything from overweight, not so much addiction and such, but anything that doesn't look perfect. Is some of the advertising is countering that, right? And which is good. But
Which is good, but I think that also the fact that you can show all, you know, all sorts of anything, right? At the same time, is countering it just a reaction? Is countering it sending a different message? Not that it's okay to be this way or to look this way, but there are advertisements now that show downright unhealthy people
yeah.
being proud of being unhealthy, and
Yeah.
I don't know that that's the right message either.
There's a fine line between it's okay to, I think it's okay to recognize the struggles you may be having
Yeah.
with putting food down because perhaps you have developed a food addiction,
Yeah.
right? That's okay. The journey is okay. Sitting in it and kind of giving up on trying to improve that isn't okay. It's not okay. It's not, there's no transformation there for you, for any.
I would say going back to your societal question and the impact society has, TV and radio and all those things, advertising and all that stuff that we've been exposed to since birth. I would say on a personal level, I'm sure I was impacted by all of it. Just, you know, wanting to buy this or to wear that because this person has this or looks like that. And I'm sure there was definite influence there, but I would say that I was more influenced by criticism. Um, less about what I saw on TV and more about what somebody said on the playground
Yeah.
or what other people thought was funny or mean or this or that. That's where I was probably most impacted, and that's where I would probably say I either doubled down and became a worse version of myself for it, or maybe I was hiding, you know, sneaking around and doing things that I shouldn't have done because I didn't want to be judged for those things. Like I didn't want to be known as somebody that, you know, like even liking sports could be perceived as nerdy from depending on who you're talking to. So you don't want to over talk because you don't want to be perceived that way. So, but I would say that if you succumb to that, any of us, if you succumb to it, you'll end up having resentment toward the group that you think is judging you versus just being good with who you are. And I got you way off track in this conversation, but just going through recovery, it's a daily grind, a daily test of trying to process whatever these thoughts are and decisions that you need to make. I mean, that's not easy. I would think that it just never goes away.
I'm going to challenge you on just one point here, Dave.
All right, go ahead.
My recovery is not a daily grind.
No.
My active alcoholism was a daily grind, repeating the same thing day after day after day with no hope of no hope period. No hope. No hope of being successful in business. No hope of having a relationship, long-lasting relationship, a loving, long-lasting, compatible, uh, challenging, enjoyable relationship. So my recovery is not a daily grind. Recovery is just the opposite. My recovery is so I'm 61 years old. I'm having more fun in my life now
Yeah.
than I ever have. But I know that I'm only one drink away from falling back into a hopeless state of mind.
Did you start recovery there though? Did you start recovery with this is exactly what I wanted, or was there work that went into?
Well, I want to get back to your grind point. There's an expression, there's a prayer in Alcoholics Anonymous, or it might not even be a prayer. It's actually out of How It Works, which explains in the Alcoholic Big Book how it works, how the program is laid out. And it talks I'm paraphrasing and I should know this by heart, but it talks about we will trudge the road of happy destiny. Well, trudging feels like grind, right? Trudging, almost walking through thick mud. We do trudge it in the beginning, and if we stick around long enough, we experience the happy journey. We experience the happy road of destiny, and that becomes our destiny, to be happier, to be lighter. It's not to be perfect. Notice I'm not calling, it's not about achieving perfection in recovery or even in sobriety. Okay. I have enormous respect for people who have long-term uninterrupted recovery. At one point I had double-digit recovery myself over 10 years, and I fell short and picked up a drink. When I say fell short, okay, that's not an assault on everything that I've learned or an assault on my character. What it means is in that time, I somehow I got far enough away from a spiritual connection to a higher power, a daily, certainly daily attendance in AA meetings where I'm hearing the message. It's part of, so this is the other thing too I wanted to touch on is about connection versus isolation. Okay, the opposite of isolation is connection. The reason I still go to AA meetings after so many decades is because of the connection. I'm no longer there seeking the knowledge, but I still have to hear how this program works. I still have to hear the messages of young people like myself years ago who come into the hall desperate and alone and not understanding why they need to be there, right? I need to be there to also put my hand out. My duty in Alcoholics Anonymous is my pledge is to put my hand out to a newcomer or someone coming back from a relapse to say, I get you, I understand you, and I've been in your shoes. Everybody in every AA meeting or NA meeting across the world has one time been a newcomer, right? And thank God people are still finding the doors or finding their way through the doors and getting into programs of recovery. There weren't a lot of treatment centers that were, let's put it this way, they were, when I got sober in the late 80s, there wasn't as much attention drawn to treatment programs. So I didn't go to a treatment program. I went straight into AA, and there I found what I needed. My relapse 4.5 years ago, I went to a treatment program, a 30-day treatment program. I went all the way across the country to Utah for a 30-day treatment program, something I was not willing to do previously because I realized that, I'm now in my mid to late 50s. And I'm doing the same thing I did so many years ago. I'm recognizing I'm fallen prey to this disease, and I need to do something different. And I went to this program and worked the 12 steps in 30 days, along with many, many other people. And it got me reconnected in a way that I needed. It gave me the shot in the arm. It rejuvenated my recovery, and it has carried me since. But again, I still a daily reprieve. I have to do the maintenance.
Isn't it like that with anything in life that you want? You got to put in the time because,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And all that I've read and all the neuroscientists that I've listened to over the years, they talk about that the brain craves structure and routine. And when you described your experiences with alcohol and the grind of that, the only routine you had, from what I'm hearing, is that the drinking was the routine, and then there was chaos around the drinking. But now, having gone through recovery, it sounds to me like you have an awareness that even if you do relapse, and you did, that you have the understanding that a routine exists that can get me on track. As long as you know there's a formula, isn't it really about, now I'm not trying to make this sound easy because I know it's not. It takes a long time to develop habits and routine. I think with alcoholism, you unconsciously develop a habit that you may never unwind if you're not careful. Now you have to consciously redevelop habits and routines to work your way out of that. And that's where I would think the initial grind is. But as far as the routine of connection, I would think just knowing the routine of connection is so critical to recovery. Has that in any way caused you, having gone through some of this, have you had to rethink your connections? Have you had to move away from some and introduce others into your life? Have you had to say no to
Oh,
people?
yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, I went through that this year alone. I've lost connections with two or three people that I had pretty intense peer-to-peer relationships with. Um, all three of those separations were my decision, and it's because it's because I was starting to pay more and more attention to my instincts. Always underestimated my instincts.
Like what? Give me an example.
So I was spending some time with one person in particular, and every time this person called me on the phone, I would feel anxious. We would start getting together and make plans, and I would feel anxious. Couldn't understand, what is this anxiety about? What is this? What is this all about? Well, I don't think I truly wanted to spend time or invest in this friendship any longer. And I don't mean it wasn't serving me in a self egotistical way, like, it's not about casting people out of my life, but I had to pay attention to that voice. Why, when I make plans with this person, why, when this person reaches out to me, what is going on? I felt like this whole kind of, I was playing a caretaking role. I was falling into that caretaking role that I didn't want to play anymore with anybody in my life, anybody. And I think that when you do get older and you recognize that, it's hard enough to make plans with people you love to be around with, right? These days, everyone's so busy. Everyone's so busy. It's hard to make plans. I have dear friends that don't make me ever feel anxious. I have friends that if I don't hear from them for a year and a half and they call me today, I'm going to be joyful about answering the phone. I'm not judging them. I'm not asking myself, why haven't I heard from them? Well, whatever. It's because there's an ease in that relationship that is just, there's this boundaries, unspoken boundaries, or we don't have boundaries in the sense we didn't feel like we had to establish boundaries. I was finding with this person that I had to establish boundary, and that because there was moments where I felt my boundaries of time and
Yeah.
availability were being crossed. Okay. I also want to say real quick, I love my gym analogy when it comes to, you ever go to the gym, Dave, and you're looking around and young and old guys, they're there and they're on their phones. And maybe you're just watching, all these people are on their phones. No one's lifting any weights. No one's getting on the machine, for a period of time. That would be like me going to an AA meeting and not participating or being on my phone, right? I'm not paying attention. If you want to build muscle, you have to use the machines. You don't just go there and put in your time walking through the door and send 9 or 10 texts and not do any of the lifting, right? Same with AA and recovery, any AA or any recovery meetings, I should say. I have to go and participate. That means opening my mouth. It's not about lifting weights in a meeting. It's about opening my mouth and sharing what my concerns are that day, what my fears might be, what my free-floating anxiety might be about. Because I need people to identify. That's how I get better. Because again, I can't say enough about the fact that alcoholism is an isolating disease. It wants to isolate me, separate me, and eventually kill me. That's what I've come to accept.
Do you have a few more minutes? I know we've blown through the first
Yeah.
hour. I have a question. I know you're not a doctor. I know you're not claiming to be a doctor, but you've got to have some awareness around the impact of positive routine and structure on the chemicals in your brain. Now, alcohol is a depressant, and eventually what it does is it's just going to trigger cortisol release in the brain, which is only going to just destroys all of us. Stress limits our creativity, fuels anxiety, depression, all those things, lack of sleep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, breaks us down. How aware are you about the pharmacy that exists in your head? And I've read a lot about this because no, it exists in all of our heads. We've got to somehow. Some of us have maybe it functions more efficiently in some brains than others. But the reality is there's a lot of good stuff that can naturally be released in the mind if you commit to the right stuff, the doing of the right stuff. How much does that play a role in your recovery from an awareness standpoint, if at all?
Very, very important to be aware of that, very important to pay attention to that. I've had to pay attention to that. It's remarkable when I am in my sickness and I dig out of the hole, so to speak. I'm not instantly feeling better. I'm living with some regrets. I'm living with some pain. I'm living with physical separation, you know, some potential withdrawal, depending on how long I may have had that drink in my system. But I feel that it's very important to be aware of those things. And you're right, you don't have to be a doctor. It's not necessarily about the diagnosis or the clinical treatment. I did seek clinical treatment, but along with that clinical treatment came connection, human connection. I'll tell you what has worked for me more than any kind of clinical treatment, you know. And I've not, you know, there's a lot of programs out there that deal with harm reduction. I support those. I haven't had to go the way of any harm reduction medications. But it's human connection that keeps me coming back. It eliminates the lies in my head, if only temporarily. You know, an hour a day in a meeting, it gives me an opportunity to remember the messaging that I heard, to remember the connections that I made there, the identification that I've made there with other people who are sharing and sounding just like me. Once you hear those voices out loud, it's impossible to believe the lies that the alcoholic mind tells me. Okay, so it's impossible because if other people are voicing the same thoughts and concerns and fears that I have, then that makes it true. And I can live in the truth today.
I want you to comment on gratitude. Before you comment on gratitude, it's often used as a punchline by people. I know you don't use it that way. It's all over social media, and people on their yachts are feeling grateful and blessed. And it's like, I hope that boat sinks. Anyway, I'm being an idiot there. There's something about, in order for this to work, the words that come to my mind that I never used, but I think about them now as I'm getting older, are words like forgiveness of self-acceptance, self-forgiveness. It's like we're our own worst critics and judges. No matter what anyone else thinks, it's kind of irrelevant because really all we're really doing is paying attention to what we think about ourselves, and then we look for evidence in other people, society included. That's one comment I want you to maybe say something about. The other one is grace, and giving yourself grace. And if you do that, you're more apt to give somebody else grace. And I see that, and I don't really want to get into it because it's such a hot story, but I mean, this, if you watch the news and you see that all the stuff that's allegedly going wrong, and when you see one group arguing against another group, it's more about, I want to make you as wrong as possible. I'm going to dehumanize you to the nth degree, and I'm never going to give you space to recover from what I think of you. And I think there's just something about needing to channel grace that's important in order to ultimately feel gratitude, which is one of the things that you were going to talk about. But maybe we can kind of end on you commenting on those things. You pick whatever you want to comment on, and then I'll let you go for the day because I know you have other things to do.
No, thank you so much. I will comment on the grace factor and the gratitude. I'm not going to talk necessarily. I have a grateful heart today. Okay, that is grounded in things that I actually do, and mentally, not physically. A list in my head every night of 5 things. Those 5 things generally don't change. Doesn't matter what they are to you, they matter what they are to me. I stay grateful for those things. No matter what my mood is, I can still find 5 things in my life that I'm grateful for. And my recovery is at the top of that list. And then other very important things are on that list. So none of which are externals. As far as grace is concerned, I loved what you had to say about we have to, I'm paraphrasing, but we have to provide grace for ourselves in order to provide grace for others. I'll counter that. It's taken me years to get this. I used to agree with that notion. That is still, if I'm just focusing on forgiving myself, if I'm still focusing on providing grace for myself, I am still self-centered. I'm still self-centered to the extreme. That is my disease. I need to get away from that. Okay. You know how you get self-esteem? By doing esteemable things. I have to give grace to you, Dave. And by doing that, I get the grace back for myself. I'm doing an esteemable thing by giving you grace. I'm doing an esteemable thing by giving grace to the guy that flipped me off in the car. Okay, sure. Does it come instantly? No, it doesn't. Those are things I have to pray on. Part of my 10-step prayer at night. Please help me to give grace to somebody who I felt offended by today.
Sure.
Because in that moment, I want to fight back, right? I want to fight back. I want to maybe even chase that guy down, or, well, what did I do, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
I have to give grace to other people. And that's how I get it back to myself. When I do esteemable things for other people, one of my favorite things to do is actually, and people might roll their eyes, but is to do something for somebody else and not tell anyone about it.
Yeah.
Kindness, right? I don't do it all the time. I don't do it every day, but I do like to do it. Is it serving my ego? Sure, in a certain way it is. But is it more important to serve them? Like go to a cafe and buy someone breakfast and don't tell them about it, and walk out the door. Don't wait for a handshake. Don't do that. That still makes me feel good because I didn't do something necessarily for myself. Way I did, right? Because it gave me esteem. It helped me to move through my day with a little less focus on me.
Until you realize that you can let yourself off the hook, you can let go of the things you're holding on to and give yourself grace to say, you know what, I really fucked up and I made a lot of mistakes and I'm not looking to do it again. But you can now see the humanity in another person. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. I see people attacking other people verbally on social media, on television, and deciding and striking down and judging them. And I always wonder, how hard are you on yourself? How lonely are you inside?
I was feeling those very same things. That's why I got off Facebook at the beginning of 2023. I couldn't stand all the political climate. I couldn't stand all the hate. I couldn't stand all the relationships. There were a couple of relationships that I chose not to participate in because of that very thing. I found that my preoccupation on Facebook was becoming detrimental to me and my peace of mind. I got off it. The only social media I'm on today is LinkedIn for business and Instagram so people can see my pretty puppies. Okay, so that's pretty much what I'm there for. And I may even give that up. I won't give up LinkedIn. It's important to make business connections as long as I stay in business. I literally had to go through that feeling of separation, like, oh my God, no one's going to know anything about my life. Well, guess what? That's not a bad thing. Anonymity sometimes in life is not a bad thing when it comes to, no one needs to know where I'm having my daily coffee today, what restaurant I'm eating sushi in. But I mean, I don't need to put my relationship, my conflicts or any out there for public viewing. We never did before 2008, but everyone feels compelled to do it now. And I was one of those people. Again, I'm not judging, but it has benefited me by reducing the amount of that impact. I feel better. And I'm not, it also takes away another tool that I could possibly use to harm somebody else.
Yeah, that's well said. All right, man. We're gonna do one more episode in a couple of weeks. Maybe we'll do 10 of them. This is great. I appreciate it, Donn. Anything that you didn't say that you wanted to say, or did we do a decent job with this one?
I think we did a decent job. I'm starting to feel a little bit more comfortable in this setting. This is great, Dave. You make it very comfortable and very friendly. Your questions are probing and interesting and fantastic.
Well, at least they're not meandering, I hope. But anyway, thank you so much. I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. We're going to do another one of these. So I look forward to seeing you again.
Sounds good, Dave. Thanks so much.